At nearly 7,000 meters below the Philippine Sea, scientists have finally confirmed the world's deepest shipwreck, the USS Samuel B. Roberts. This small World War II escort, long thought lost beneath more than twice the depth of Titanic, holds the final story of a desperate, outgunned crew and the technology that found them after 80 years. But why did such an ordinary ship end up in an abyss no one thought possible? And what secrets does it keep, locked in the dark? Launched into the Pacific in 1944, the USS Samuel B. Roberts was never meant to be a giant. Her hull stretched just 306 feet, barely the length of a city block. At 1,350 tons, she was a fraction of the weight of the battleships that prowled the same waters. Built as a John C. Butler-class destroyer escort, her job was to protect convoys and larger ships, not to stand in the line of fire. Armor was kept light to save weight. Her main gun, a single 5-inch mount, looked modest beside the heavy artillery of the fleet. Yet it was the crew that gave her life. 224 officers and enlisted men served aboard her, many of them little older than high school graduates. Wartime urgency had filled the ship with sailors in their late teens and early 20s, some away from home for the first time, all swept into the vast machinery of the Pacific War. Their captain, Robert W. Copeland, would later become famous for his resolve, but the heart of the ship was this collection of young men, engineers, cooks, gunners, and signalmen, learning their roles as the world around them changed by the hour. The ship carried the name of Samuel B. Roberts, a coxswain who had died 2 years earlier in the Solomon Islands, drawing enemy fire to save others. The legacy of sacrifice ran deep in the steel. The men of Sammy B drilled for torpedo attacks and practiced damage control in the shadow of far larger ships. They knew the limits of their vessel. They knew the odds were never in their favor. But in the weeks before Leyte Gulf, no one could have predicted just how far those limits would be tested, or how this small ship would come to stand for something far greater than her size. Lieutenant Commander Robert W. Copeland carried a reputation for cool judgment, but when the moment called for it, he became something more. On the morning of October the 25th, 1944, with enemy pagoda masts rising on the horizon and the radios crackling with grim reports, Copeland assembled his crew and delivered a message that would echo through naval history. He told them they faced overwhelming odds, that survival was unlikely, and he closed with the promise, "We will do what damage we can." That simple order, given in the face of near-certain destruction, set the tone for everything that followed. The men of Samuel B. Roberts felt the weight of that promise. They had drilled for torpedo attacks and damage control, but now the reality was far harsher. Copeland's leadership was not about bravado. It was a steady, deliberate resolve. He was methodical, moving through the ship, checking with gun crews, engine rooms, and signalmen, making sure every man knew his role. He trusted his crew to fight well above their weight, and they trusted him to lead them through the worst. This mutual confidence shaped the ship's legend. After the battle, historians and Navy officers alike would call Samuel B. Roberts the destroyer escort that fought like a battleship. It was not just the guns or the tactics, it was the mental framework Copeland built in his crew. They understood their mission was to shield the vulnerable escort carriers, even if it meant closing with ships 10 times their size. The crew's sense of duty, sharpened by Copeland's steady hand, would carry them into a battle where calculation gave way to courage. In the hours ahead, every decision would be measured against that promise to do what damage they could. As the Japanese center force closed in, Copeland's words became the ship's compass, guiding them toward a fight that would test the limits of human endurance and redefine what a small ship could achieve against overwhelming odds. Dawn broke over the Philippine Sea with a wall of enemy steel on the horizon. Pagoda masts rose from the haze, battleships, heavy cruisers, destroyers, closing fast on the small American escort group. Lieutenant Commander Copeland wasted no time. Instead of retreat, he ordered a charge. Samuel B. Roberts surged ahead at flank speed, engines straining, her low silhouette cutting through the morning spray. Smoke generators blanketed the carriers behind them, but Sammy B broke from cover, zigzagging straight toward the Japanese line. The distance closed with terrifying speed. At just over 5 nautical miles, closer than her torpedoes were ever meant to fire, Copeland gave the command. 3 torpedoes left the port tubes in rapid sequence, streaking toward the lead Japanese heavy cruiser. Every eye on deck watched for the result. Minutes later, a distant plume and sudden confusion in the enemy formation signaled a hit. Japanese gunners, momentarily thrown off, shifted their attention to the daring escort that had just broken their line. With torpedoes spent, Sammy B pressed forward into gun range. Her single 5-inch mount barked out, shells aimed at the superstructure of a cruiser nearly 10 times her size. The crew loaded and fired as fast as hands could move, targeting bridges, fire control towers, and anything that might disrupt enemy aim. Smaller guns joined in, 40mm and even 20mm mounts, weapons designed for aircraft now turned on armored ships. Shells from the Japanese fleet began to straddle the Roberts, geysers erupting off her bow and stern. Each near miss sent shrapnel scything across the decks, but the crew kept their stations. The destroyer escort darted through the chaos, drawing fire away from the vulnerable carriers, her actions forcing the enemy to split their salvos. For nearly an hour, Sammy B. Roberts fought at close quarters, firing every round she had, her small frame punching far above its weight. The Japanese guns, frustrated and surprised, concentrated their fury on the ship that refused to back down. The odds grew heavier with every minute, but the Roberts kept up the attack, buying precious time for the rest of the group. A shell from a Japanese battleship tore through the stern, and the deck erupted in fire and smoke. The engine room flooded in minutes, knocking out power and leaving the ship dead in the water. Crewmen scrambled to fight the flames and tend the wounded, but the list grew sharper with every moment. Orders rang out over the chaos: prepare to abandon ship. By just before 10 in the morning, Lieutenant Commander Copeland gave the final command. Men formed lines at the rails, some helping the injured into the sea, others grabbing life jackets or clinging to battered rafts. Oil slicks spread across the waves, burning eyes and skin as the survivors kicked away from the sinking hull. The Samuel B. Roberts rolled to starboard and slipped beneath the surface, the sound of her guns replaced by the hiss of bubbles and the cries of men in the water. Of the 224 men who had gone into battle, 89 would never return. The rest, some badly burned and many wounded, found themselves adrift in the open sea. Rafts and floater nets scattered in the swell. The sun beat down by day, salt water blistered lips, and at night, cold crept in. For just over 2 days, about 50 hours, the survivors drifted, watching the horizon for rescue. Some rafts stayed together, others drifted apart. Petty officers tried to keep spirits up, rationing water and urging men to hold on. Stories passed between the wounded about the last moments on deck, the faces of friends lost in the smoke, and the hope that help would come before hunger and thirst claimed more lives. Sharks circled in the distance. A few men vanished quietly, but most clung to life. When rescue ships finally appeared on the morning of October 27th, what remained of the crew was pulled from the sea, burned, exhausted, but alive. The place where Samuel B. Roberts disappeared remained unknown, her final position lost among the waves and the confusion of battle. For decades, families and historians could only guess where the ship had come to rest, her story suspended somewhere between memory and the deep. In the aftermath of the battle, the precise resting place of Samuel B. Roberts vanished into uncertainty. Wartime records offered only rough estimates, dead reckoning, not pinpoint coordinates. Navigators fighting for survival marked positions with pencil on charts, but the chaos of combat distorted every bearing. Shellfire rattled compasses, rain squalls obscured land, and engines failed without warning. The last reported location was little more than a guess, drifting miles from the truth as the ship maneuvered under fire. Survivors in the water had no way to record their drift. Life rafts and bodies scattered across the sea, swept by wind and current for nearly 2 days before rescue. When ships finally picked up the living, their positions were logged many kilometers from where the Roberts had gone down. Each account added a new layer of confusion, stretching the possible search area across a vast swath of the Philippine Sea. The seafloor itself offered no help. The region east of Samar drops away sharply, plunging from the continental shelf to abyssal depths in a matter of miles. At nearly 7,000 meters, the pressure is beyond what most machines can endure. For decades, even the most advanced remotely operated vehicles could not reach these depths. Oceanographic maps from the 20th century showed only broad contours, not the fine detail needed to pick out a single ship's hull. The combination of human error, navigational drift, and a hostile undersea landscape left the Samuel B. Roberts hidden in one of the least accessible places on Earth, her story suspended between memory and black silence below. At nearly 7,000 meters below the surface, the search for Samuel B. Roberts demanded a new breed of technology. The heart of the operation was the submersible limiting factor, a titanium sphere engineered to withstand pressures over 1,000 times greater than at sea level. Certified for dives as deep as 11 kilometers, it could descend to places where the weight of the water would crush almost any other machine. Inside, pilot Victor Vescovo and his team relied on a suite of custom-designed systems, including syntactic foam for buoyancy, oil-filled electronics, and navigation calibrated for a world without GPS signals. The search began with wide-area sonar mapping. Multi-beam and side-scan sonar swept the sea floor, sending out fans of sound to detect anything that broke the monotony of mud and rock. At these depths, a shipwreck is less a silhouette than a faint anomaly, a patch of hard echo among endless soft returns. The team planned overlapping search lines, each pass narrowing the search box by highlighting shapes roughly the size of a destroyer escort hull. Once sonar flagged a target, limiting factor could make repeated dives to the same spot, a feat impossible in the era of one-off expeditions. Every system, from thrusters to life support, was built for reliability under crushing pressure. The sub's deep-rated cameras and acoustic positioning allowed Vescovo and sonar specialist Jeremy Morizet to maneuver just meters above the sea floor, scanning for evidence of steel among the silt. This blend of engineering and methodical search strategy transformed the hunt for Sammy B from a gamble into a calculated investigation, setting the stage for what would become the world's deepest shipwreck discovery. A faint echo on the sonar screen, almost lost in the static, hinted at something unnatural far below. The team aboard limiting factor steadied their course, tracing a narrow ridge nearly 7 kilometers beneath the Philippine Sea. As the submersible's cameras swept over the seafloor, a sharp-edged structure emerged from the darkness, a shape too regular to be geology. There, upright against the slope, was the bow of a ship. Painted numbers, still legible after nearly 8 decades under crushing pressure, read DE 413. No doubt remained. The world's deepest shipwreck had been found. The hull's geometry told its own story. The bow section stood upright, battered but unmistakable, while the stern rested about 5 meters downslope, separated but close, evidence of a violent impact with the slope rather than a slow disintegration. Gun mounts, the forecastle, and even the outlines of the bridge survived, preserved by the cold, low oxygen depths. The hull's battered steel bore scars matching survivor accounts, shell holes, a collapsed mast, and the torn stern, all frozen in the moment of the ship's final descent. For the pilots, the sight was both triumphant and sobering. The Samuel B. Roberts had outlasted the limits of memory and technology, her story written not just in battle reports, but in the angles and ruptures of steel. At nearly 6,900 meters, over 400 meters deeper than the previous record holder, USS Johnston, the Sammy B's resting place set a new frontier for deep-sea discovery. The decades-old question of where she lay had at last a definitive answer. The world now knew where the destroyer escort that fought like a battleship had come to rest. Nearly 7 kilometers beneath the surface, the resting place of the Samuel B. Roberts is governed by laws of physics as much as by human intent. Here, temperatures hover just above freezing, and the water holds so little oxygen that corrosion slows to a crawl. Decades after the ship vanished, her hull still carries the scars of battle, the outlines of gun mounts and torn steel preserved in the cold dark. In this abyss, the ship has become a rare kind of monument, one that endures because the deep itself is inhospitable to both life and decay. Yet the ocean's isolation is no longer absolute. Advances in submersibles and robotics have made it possible for explorers, scientists, and even private ventures to reach places once thought unreachable. What was once a forbidding barrier is now a challenge that technology is steadily overcoming. Each new expedition, each camera and sonar pass brings the world's attention closer to what lies in these depths. But with access comes responsibility. The Samuel B. Roberts is not just a relic, it is a protected war grave recognized by the United States Navy and international law. Unauthorized disturbance is strictly forbidden. This legal status is more than a technicality. It is a promise that the site will be treated with respect, that it will not become a target for scavengers or trophy hunters as deep-sea tourism becomes more feasible. The discovery of the world's deepest shipwreck is not only a triumph of exploration, but a reminder that stewardship matters as much as curiosity. What endures at the bottom of the Philippine Sea is not just steel, but memory, and the obligation to honor both. Nearly 7,000 meters down, the Samuel B. Roberts reminds us how much of our history still lies hidden in the planet's least accessible places. As deep-sea technology advances, the boundary between myth and evidence keeps shifting. What we choose to uncover and to protect will shape how we remember both war and the ocean itself. The abyss keeps its secrets, but not forever. Subscribe for more deep-sea mysteries and don't miss a single episode.